My name is Larry Casso. I want to welcome you once again to my studio, where I'm going to attempt a watercolor from this preliminary 4 by 6 inch sketch known as a topiary. The colors I'll be using in the palette are going to be Naples yellow, burnt sienna, Hooker's green, cad yellow, burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, and white gouache. Now the final painting is going to be executed on a half sheet of watercolor paper, Arches 300-pound hot press, and it is, as I mentioned, going to be done from a preliminary study that I've worked out, and will probably be utilized eventually by a company that uses some of our work to produce floor mats, car mats, and so forth. So we'll have a multi-purpose usage of this, but in addition to it, it's a really beautiful painting, and it's one that's been very popular, and has a lot of my students have attempted to do it from the preliminary study, and we're just going to go ahead and conclude it in a finished painting. Now the first thing I'd like you to notice is the detail that you see in my preliminary layout, or my line drawing. Now notice I've got this focused in pretty closely on the screen so that you can see it, but when the screen is, or the picture is enlarged, naturally you're not going to be able to see this too well. I can't stress enough to you again, notice the lines are disappearing at this size, but that's okay. I can't stress enough to you, as I do to my students, that you have to have a good preliminary study, and you have to know what your line work is, where it is, what you're going to be doing. You can't just wait till the last minute to make some of these decisions. As I always mention, preparation, proper preparation does not limit you. It actually loosens you, and it gives you the flexibility to pretty well paint in a way that gives you a lot more liberty, I feel, rather than restraining you. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a larger brush here. I've got a 1-inch high acrylic type brush. I found this works very well in moving the water around, and in cases moving the pigment around also. So let's just begin by, now notice I'm going left to right, very liberally wetting this. Now I might mention, for some of you that have not used the hot press, what it is, it's just like your regular 300-pound cold press, but it's pressed in a press when it's still wet in heated conditions, and it creates a very smooth surface. It's very thin. It's not much thicker than your 140-pound, but of course it's just the compressed cotton in the paper that gives you a little bit more firmness, and in this case gives me a much better surface for what I'm attempting to do. Now, after wetting the paper down completely, we're going to begin with just plain Naples yellow. The Naples is a very pretty yellow. It's a neutral yellow. You may not even hardly see it on your screen. What's unique about it is the fact that it's very much a neutral type of a yellow that's in fashion right now. It goes very well, complements a lot of different colors. It's a very pretty warm yellow, but not a bright yellow as your cadmium would be. So we're just going to come right on down and just cover everything. Now I know from experience that this does dry. You can see it somewhat on your television screen. I know from experience that this does dry quite a bit lighter. Now I'm going to try to really give an illuminated effect. As you see in the reference picture that you're looking at, the window area is lighted against the silhouette of the leaves and of the topiaries, and the wall on the inside is darkened somewhat, creating quite a bit of interest. So what we're going to do is just take this Naples yellow, just bring it all the way down and actually tint the entire painting with this color. Okay, now that's pretty well what I would like it to be all over. So for those of you who are not aware of this, a good blow dryer works very well to dry this quickly. So I'm going to just put it on pause and blow dry this, and we'll come back and pick up the second step. Now we're going to proceed to the next portion of our painting, and this is where we're going to take the Naples, and this time we'll mix a little bit of burnt sienna with it. And we're going to just lightly, now I'm using about a 1-inch brush here. Some of you may have a 3/4 or whatever now you feel comfortable with. And one of the things I'd like to do, notice how I'm just coming straight down that line, and I'm actually, this is going to be a little lighter than I wanted, but I'm purposely doing this to keep it somewhat airy. And what I'm trying to create is the feeling of this entire wall being slightly darker, of course, illuminated by the outside windows. Now I'm getting a little bit closer to some of the color range that I'd like to have on it. I would like this to be slightly darker than the window without being overly so, because we want this to be very bright, very airy. Notice I'm not afraid to just go over everything. Now that's working very, very nicely. We'll just continue it right on out. Now I can't stress enough the beauty of having a value study already, where you actually have a much clearer idea of what you're doing, and a color study if possible. Anytime you don't, I really, this is the old master's technique. You know, a lot of people wonder, what do you mean when you say old master's technique? Well, that is exactly what we're talking about. That you plan your work, you have either black and white or color studies or whatever you need. Now, before this, that's very nice for the wall. Before this starts drying on me now, I'm going to just come along this area right here with it a little bit lighter so that I can wet it. And the nice thing about this, you do have stopping points, such as right here on this line by the stem of the topiary there, but I'm not going to use that. Now I might drop down to a 1/2-inch brush right now. I'll mix a little bit of ultramarine blue with my burnt sienna. It's going to give me a very pretty complementary grayish color that I'd like to bring in here a little bit more strongly. Now that's a little bit too much of the blue. So let's go back to the burnt sienna just a little bit stronger. Okay, that's very pretty. It's very much like what I'd like to have. Now we'll just bring some of this along here. I'll just feel my way into it now, a little bit more cautiously. It's a very delicate painting. Now we'll even bring some of the sienna down a little bit further and just sort of let it fade. It's very transparent, but will work very effectively in giving me some of the effects that I would like to have in here as far as the way it's going to darken. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to a bigger brush. I'm going to take our sienna, a little bit of blue now, but mostly sienna. I want to start bringing a little bit stronger tones in now to hold this together better. Now, of course, as we get away from the wall, we'll also might even bring a little bit of this down here. Kind of group it together, just leaving a little bit lighter area there by the window. Now, what we might also want to do, we want to leave its area as I mentioned, but we might want to take just a tiny bit of blue now. We'll just come back in and move that blue around a little bit. Just something to give us a little prettier color and possibly break up a little of the monotony of the colors that we have here. Now sometimes a big brush is a little bit more difficult to control as far as the amount of water and so forth, so I'm going to come back in and let's mix a little umber with that also. Okay, we'll just blend this right on out. Now later I can always come back and make it a little darker if I would like. Now again, it's a particular effect that I'm trying to get. You don't always know for sure what it's going to do when it dries. However, I want to get a little bit more of the umber, or sienna rather, up here. Perhaps start giving it a little bit of texture. Now, I know as it comes down to the base here, I want it quite a bit lighter, maybe even lighter than I've got it on here right now, so we'll just come back and lift that back up again. We'll go back in with a little bit more of the naples and the sienna in this area and leave it a little bit lighter. Okay, now if I wish to do more on here, I can later. I might do it just a little bit more at the top, just to hold that picture eye in. But remember, I'm going to have the dark foliage in the front of this. I don't really want to get too carried away in any way here. I feel like that just settles it down a little bit more. Okay. Now likewise, we'll get out a little bit more. Now here's a case where our pigment ran over a little bit. It's no big problem. But if we wanted to come back and lighten that up, I could just take my brush and do that now. Okay. Now we'll come across this bottom area. Let's get a little bit more of this. I like to get that ultramarine blue a little bit stronger, just for variety's sake. So there, I think I'm getting pretty close to what I'd like it to be. It's always the right amount of water, texture, etc. that we're striving for. You never know many times when you're doing it. I know that's too much blue again, but it's alright. We'll counter it with the brown. And again, we could be creating light reflections. It could be a number of things against this wall that we want to use really as a backdrop for the rest of our painting. Okay, I think that's going to work. Now that this particular area, I'm not as keen on that blue showing through there, so we'll just wet it a little bit more. And that'll enable us to just come back with a little bit more of the Naples plain. And I'll kind of watch that. See, contrary to what a lot of people think, you have a lot of options when you're doing watercolor. Just because you put something down a certain way doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. Now we're going to continue back with our burnt sienna and Naples color across the bottom here. And again, without overdoing it, we're just trying to come back in with enough color to darken this, give us the effect that we want. Still keep it light and airy. That's the big thing I'm trying to do. Okay, now you notice I stopped here because this gives me a chance. I stopped by this line on the topiary because it gives me a chance to come back now and rework some of this while everything is still wet. Okay, now this is coming out really very close to what I'd like. I think we could darken it just slightly. But look at the nice light area effect that's created in here. In fact, you almost can't even tell there's any color there. Alright, come around to the side of my drawing table now. Work a little bit more of this color in here. There we go. Alright, likewise I want to come back now with a little of the blue mix with the burnt sienna. And I'm a little bit more assured of what I'm doing here. So consequently I'll be able to do it with a little bit more authority. Sometimes when you do things at one size using certain colors, perhaps on a different type of paper, and you come to another size, another type of paper, everything considered together, there's always a little bit of an adjustment that you have to make. So we're making it fine now. Again, just creating a back wall, which in turn will create a little bit of interest for me. Still want to go more strongly with the siennas though, so let's not get it too gray. I kind of went over the line a little bit there, but that's alright. We're not trying to make this absolutely perfect. A little bit more of the naples in here. Okay, now as it's starting to dry up here, it's drying very nicely, very much in the range that I was hoping it would be in. So while we have this wet enough now, I'd like to get maybe a little bit more indication of some of the pretty ultramarine blue color that we're using here. Just to repeat it, see how, like you'll see, it'll tend to disappear into the pores of the paper as we go along, but it just creates an interesting and unusual effect. Alright, now lastly, we'll just come up this other side and do the same thing, and I think that for our purposes we're going to go ahead and put the video on hold right now, and it's not necessary, I think, to repeat that again. So let's just stop so we don't have to waste as much of your time actually looking at a video. Now as we come back and look at this again, I'd like you to see the first stage of what I've done. That is basically to cover everything but the topiary itself. I didn't feel it was necessary to cover that. Now notice I put my first tone in, covered the area flatly, and now I'm going to take the burnt sienna in the blue, make it a little bit stronger, and I'm going to come back around this side and you'll see that all develop when I turn it back on again. Now as you can see, I've come in and from the last frame slightly darkened this a little bit. Now we'll take our blue and our brown and one more time try to give it a little bit too much blue, a little bit more of a gray effect. We'll just bring this straight on down like this. It kind of connects all of this together. Likewise, we'll get a little bit of it up here. And then we'll just move in some of our bluer sections like this. Let's get a little bit bigger brush. It's amazing when you put this on and just watch the different stages of the drying process, how the colors change and blend. I don't know whether you're aware of this or not, but some of the colors go into the pores of the paper, some stay on the outside. Now, to make sure we don't look like we have a line that just ended here, we'll come across with a little bit of this darker color, connect this whole bottom section, and really it's just an area that's intended to kind of hold you in down here. I feel that a few sections we might want to have a little stronger burnt sienna to repeat some of our other colors, so we'll just come in and do that right now. I might do that with a 1-inch brush also. Maybe get a little bit more of it up in here. I like the idea of this being a little bit more textured. Okay, now for our purposes right now, we may come back and do some other things later, but I think you can pretty well see this completed. And now I'm going to blow dry it again, and we'll start the next phase. That pretty well concludes the wall. Now, I know you can't see this as well on here as I can, but I was a little concerned about how some of the blue colors would react and so forth in here. And I noticed that the colors are blending very nicely as I was wanting them to and so forth. So we'll just go to the next portion of this and actually reduce the vision area so we can come down and show you a little bit more clearly what I'm going to actually be doing. Alright, the next stage will be the light areas behind the window, or I should say in the windows. And if you look at the picture, we're going to basically leave all of the window part of it, the vertical window part of it, rather light. Okay, we're going to take our 1/2-inch brush now. We're almost going to put pure water, really. I'm going to use just a little bit of the naples, but for the most part we're going to use pure water. Just lightly come over the window area. And then we want to take some cadmium yellow, hooker's green, give this very light, pretty, airy color. Now, I've always found that any of the greens that you use, you have to put just a tad of burnt umber with it. I like to do that so it's not so pastel-y looking. Not a lot, but enough to do what I would like it to do. Okay. Takes a little bit of the unnaturalness out of most of the greens that you get. Now notice that while this is wet, I'm just going to take this very pretty light color and just let it run. I'm not going to cover everything. And we'll just leave it. Now, if this particular paper would hold the washes a little bit better, I would do this in 2 or 3 sections at a time. Let's just try it and see what might happen. Because you see how I'm using that flat edge to go right up against that border. So, for expediency, let's just do this a little bit more quickly. Again, leaving it almost pure white. Alright, I think these two are staying wet enough. Takes a little bit more time watching those edges like that. Alright, we'll take the same green that we mixed up, kind of bring in a little bit of it over here. Take the same mixture and come over here so it doesn't look like we're just stopping at a certain point. But I want to leave that little bit of a light Naples area come through. Okay, now you see this beginning to work very effectively. I'm just going to go ahead and conclude the rest of the windows the same way, and then we'll pick it up again. Okay, now just to refresh your memory a little bit, I'll stop and show you this part again, because what's happening is as I come towards this area, I'd really like it to begin getting lighter and lighter against the silhouette of this vase that's in the window. However, I also want some darker greens against the vase. Now, I might mention that while it was in various stages of drying, I went back in and if it started drying too lightly and I felt like I needed a little bit more definition, I went back into some of these areas like you see me doing right now, and that's really what I wanted you to pick up. But this is a little dry. I'm taking a risk here, but still you have a certain amount of leeway. I think it needs to do I need to do something where it's not so monotonous, then I'll go ahead and do it. Alright, this is our final phase right here. I'm going to leave it rather light on this side. However, on this side right here where I'm going to have the edge of the vase, and I want it to be relatively light, I'm going to go in and put a little bit stronger tones in here. Okay, and then lastly, I'll just bring this over here. Take our green and yellow very lightly. You can see it just gives a very, very loose, pleasant effect. Okay, now we have one little small section left up here that I'm going to conclude very quickly off of the screen, and then I'll come back and show it to you in just a moment. Okay, I thought I'd turn it on, let you see one more little area that I have completed. Now I'm going to go down to this last portion, which is going to be right here. Then I'm going to come in and start putting some of the shadows on the inside of the window and so forth, as you're going to see. But this is going to create a nice backdrop for what we're trying to do here. Now, in concluding this portion of it, I've pretty well given the effect that I would like it to have. Now, as I go into the inside portion of the windows now, let's just take the blow dryer, and I'll blow dry this real quickly. I won't bother to turn it off. I'm going to do something a little bit different on the inside here. Remember, we used the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue and a little naples yellow for the darker sections on the inside of the wall here. Now, essentially, the window is the same effect, actually, except it's not going to be as dark. And because of all of the green around it, we're going to take the burnt sienna, put it in there to darken it slightly, but we're going to take a little bit of green and give that shadow a greenish tint. Now, notice as I come down this wall, I'm trying for a particular effect here, and it will be primarily to make this edge stand out a little bit better. The edge of the window frame is really what I should be saying. I should add a little bit of blue to that also. So let's take the blue and the green and perhaps the burnt sienna along with it. Now, I want to make sure that this area here, that's probably got a little bit more of what I would like to have in it. And I want it essentially to be almost the same tone-wise as the outside portions that I painted in, maybe just slightly darker. And just bring it all the way down like this. Again, going with the ultramarine blue. Now, this is what I was mentioning to you so many times about being able to ad-lib while you're doing something like this. I know down at the base of it I want it slightly darker to define some of this a little bit better, so this is how we're going to do it. Now, once I determine the dark that I want, I'll proceed up with it, and basically I want this to be slightly darker than the greenery, but not extremely dark and not all the way up. So we'll just kind of come around our topiary here, extend it on up to where we get back into a wet area where we can blend it a little bit, and we'll just leave that. Now, this will likewise work very well across here. So we'll just continue it this way. Except, as we get out away from here, we'll go back to some of our original colors and leave it almost the pure Naples in this area. But we don't mind it really coming very close to blending and bleeding together, actually. Okay, now we have a little structural thing inside the actual window itself. It's a little support or area that they actually framed in, whatever. We'll put it in there. Now, though it doesn't show up that well, I feel that we should have, let's put a little bit more certain color in here I'd like to have. Okay, I feel like I would like to have, it doesn't show up as a shadow, I should say, in the picture, but I feel like I'd like to have one. So let's just take a little bit of our blue and gray and maybe just put a slight shadow on the inside of this. And I know for sure that I would like that down here and across here. And this would be like the sun is really directly above, and we're just casting light shadows very softly and gently, if at all possible, against the wall here. And in this case, the bottom of the frame. I'll go across like that wasn't even there. Now we'll go back to our, we have a little bit more to do. It'd be nice if you could be watching this with me, huh? Sorry about that. Basically what I did, as you watched me, I did this part right here, extended it down, and likewise put my shadow part across here, and pretty well just filled that in. Now, a couple of more little small areas to do. The yellow and green here, which are not going to be that big a deal, but we did forget them, so make this purposely very, very light. And this is just, as I mentioned, a filler. Okay, now we're going to take our blue and green and a little bit of sienna color again. Getting that kind of a grayish color that we got in here. We're just going to put that at the base of our window here and here. And then just continue with our shadow all the way across the bottom that we already started in this other area. Okay, that's coming together very nicely now. We're really getting down to just the final stages where we're going to put in some of the other shadows. But before we do, let's make our determination as to how dark we want some of the shadows, because we will have shadows, for instance, coming behind here. So we'll come down like this, throw that in there, Why I want to put a little green in it. Evidently it's a lot of green around it. We'll put another shadow here, and then another shadow coming out from our base. Now, in the background area here, even though it's not really clear, I do want to come in with a little bit more green in some of these areas. I'm going to come in and very lightly wash some shadow colors, particularly behind these massive areas here. So I'm just going to come down here and break it as you see me doing this here. Some of it will be pretty massive. And of course, have a little bit coming down from this area up at the top. I still feel that it does what we want it to do, captures the light and area effect of the foliage. Now, let's extend our camera back up now and see how close we are to concluding this painting. Now, it's hard sometimes for me to restrain myself, any of you that know me or know my work, been working in these subtle areas. I really like to punch the darker sections in as soon as possible, but I'm holding back, and in this case you can see it at a fairly filled in stage now. Now the next procedure I'm going to probably use will be to do the topiaries themselves, and they have somewhat of a blue-green color. We'll get into that in just a moment, but I think you can pretty well see all of the basic patterns are in there that I would like, and it's a matter of just putting in the final detail. Now if you'll notice on a lot of my windows and whatever, I'm going to pretty well leave them like they are. I will come back in probably with a little bit of Naples yellow and accent a few areas, but other than that I'm going to try to leave it as loose as possible. So let's just break for a moment and then we'll come back and do the concluding part. As I always mention when I'm recording, I really like to stop every now and then and put a mat on my painting and more or less get rid of the rough edges. And as you can see, I think the colors are very complementary. They're working very well from my standpoint. And I know I'm just working it now down to the final stages, which are going to be, I'll put the 3 topiaries in. I want you to notice that some of them are going to be a little bit cooler with a little bit more of a blue tint. The one over here is going to have a little bit more of a yellow tint to it. I'll put that in there, then I'll go in and make my final decisions on what and if I'm going to do a lot more to it. Okay, as we go in to put our final touches, let's remove the mat now. I'm going to do this first topiary here, which will be predominantly a cooler green, meaning it's going to have a little bit more ultramarine blue than the yellow in it. So let's bring it in a little bit further like that and proceed accordingly. Now, in order to do this, rather than using, I may use a little bit of the cadmium yellow with it. It's got a good 1/2-inch brush that I can control a little bit better, and a lot of green out here because that's what we're going to be using. Now let's put a lot of cadmium yellow and green. With just always a little bit of burnt umber in it, but in this case I'll add just a tiny bit of the blue, a little bit more cadmium yellow, and again you can look at the picture. You'll have to conclude the colors for yourself and things like this naturally. It isn't going to have the bright or the brilliant yellowy look that you'll have in some of the other things that are done like this. Okay, so we'll proceed. Now I notice that these things are tightly woven together, Now perhaps I could have left this just a little bit lighter. Let's try to do so by, no, I know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to just add white and come back with it that way. Okay, this is a good neutral color for me because it's not a bright yellow-green. And it's going to give me a chance to come back in a moment and add the darker tones while it's wet. Proceed with a little bit more blue. You'll see what I'm talking about. There are just some greens that are very bright, yellowy, forest looking. Not that these aren't. And there are some that you can notice the leaves and they just have a much bluer tint to them, or cooler. So we'll start this like this, and that's going to be a good base coat. Now the one I'm doing here, I'm going to have a little bit more of the cadmium yellow in it. Now with that in mind, I'll take a little bit more of the green and the blue and a little bit of the umber, minus the cadmium yellow this time. Now while this is pretty wet, I'm going to just go in and begin to give it a little bit of form. And texture is simply by the method in which I put the different tones in, as you're seeing. Now as I come back around the back portion of it, I'm going to have a little bit of the lighter tones showing. We don't want a whole lot. Now you can see how just the basic shading alone in this middle tone area is beginning to really bring it out. And of course we always want to have a little bit of this kind of thing here. Now at a certain point I'd like to come back with a little bit of white perhaps and even bring that out a little bit more. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Now for the last stage, I'm going to take the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber. I'm going to really get my dark in. Use a lot of pigment, very little water. Don't be afraid of it. Now I want to allow a little bit of the middle tone or darker tone greens, actually I should call them, to come through. But for the most part, to really give this the emphasis I would like it to have, you're going to have to get your strong darks in there. So we'll proceed accordingly. Remember, we're using the blue, the green, and the burnt umber, but this time we're almost using them completely opaque. Very little water. Now what I like about being able to do this, if you can pull it off, I really love to come in and just create these patterns and shapes while the paper is still a little bit wet. Now maybe I can bring out a little bit of the detail I'd like to bring in here. And then again, remember, it's not going to be solid anywhere, so maybe around the edges, I kind of like this now. We're giving it a little bit more of a lost and found effect. And I think I'm pretty close to what I want that to be. However, my nature is still such that I'd like to come in and punch a little bit stronger dark in there, just in a couple of areas to develop that form a little bit more. So let's do that. This will be strictly burnt umber and ultramarine blue. And of course it's all drying now, and it's enabling me to get in a little bit stronger. But this is where you make your decision and you make your statement and you don't worry about it. I'm very satisfied with the outcome there, because contrary to my little one, I've left a lot of the lighter areas around it, and I'm quite satisfied with it. I'm not going to have to come back in and use the white nearly as much as I thought I would. Now, as I mentioned, This does have a little bit of a lighter edge, so I'm taking gouache now, which is opaque watercolor. That's all it is. So you're accustomed to using the transparent. And some of these areas here that are not real clear, I want to come in and just highlight with the white just a little bit and blend it in the opposite way. Worked very well on a small one. You do have this effect in the original photograph, so we'll kind of try to pick that up. I think it gives it a little bit more definition that's needed. Let that dry and see what it looks like. And further softens it somewhat too. So now if you notice, if this is showing up fairly well on the screen, I think it is, we have the extreme light, then we have the middle tone, a little darker middle tone than the dark. Within the middle tones, we've got lighter areas. Within the darks, we've got lighter middle tones. And that's a very successful rendering there from my standpoint in terms of doing the wet on wet and still getting the effect that I want in it. Now again, so we can keep a continuity in the painting, the larger topiary next to the one that you were looking at, I put in with the same basic cooler color again, and I'll go ahead and conclude it now. Now I thought you might enjoy joining me again right at the conclusion of this second topiary. Again, I'm going to try to use a little bit of the white with it, with some of these basic colors that I'm using. And it's ironic how it's not a lot, but it just adds a certain effect to it that I think enhances the leaf effect and just creates a little bit more interest all over. I notice I'm taking a little bit of the yellow and the white even in some of these darker sections if I feel like I need to break it up a little bit. Notice how that you can even see that on the TV screen. It's coming out very nicely. Now I'm going to drop down to perhaps a number 4 or a number 8 brush, whichever I happen to grab first. And I'm going to come in on the edges of this topiary here that's a little bit larger, because I know that as effective as I think what I've done has worked out, I'm still leaving some edges that are a little bit too defined for my purposes, so I'd like to give a little bit more of the effect of the leaves. Now, I feel like I'm very close to what I want on this part of it now. The only thing I might do a little bit differently is to just come in, and I feel like up in here, perhaps I could, because of the size of this particular topiary, I feel like I could go back in, or need to go back in and possibly pull out a few more lights. Now, if you remember on the last topiary, the final thing that I did was to come in, I took some burnt umber and ultramarine blue, almost solid pigment, and that's what I'm actually doing in this stage. Now, you won't see this show up on your screen, but if you'll just remember your basic lessons on a circle, you're always going to have that darker section around the base of it that creates the reflected light in the back. Now that looks a little bit like a blob here, but basically that captures what I wanted it to capture, and you'll see it in the finished picture. Now let's move over and we'll do the topiary in the middle, which I'm going to do with a little bit more of the cadmium color rather than the blue. Okay, let's go to our final topiary in the center of the window actually. And this is where we're going to take primarily the cadmium, a little bit darker than what's behind it. We're going to basically start it with this lighter color as you see it here. That was a little bit dark, so I just moved it around. As I always try to tell my students, when you're doing transparent watercolor, don't panic if it's too dark and you're working in a section like this. You can move it around a little bit. Alright, now that certainly doesn't stand out very well against that green backdrop, and that's what we have to overcome. So the next thing I'll do is come in with my second tone, which will be just the umber in the green. Now we'll start at the base of it like we did on the others. So here we want our edges to be a little bit more defined. Now many people fail to recognize that what actually creates light and dark. Well, you can't have a dark without a light. So here we have a lighter tone here that's way too light for what we want. When I put it on, it's totally flat. But now look at it, how it begins to develop some form as I put in middle tones to bring it out a little bit more. Now, because this is against an area that is going to be considerably lighter, we'll just take I'm taking a 1/2 inch flat brush again now. We'll just put a little bit of this around the edges. Break this up a little bit on the inside. I think we're still capturing the effect that we want. I may put a little bit more of the dark in it. Now I'm coming into the final phase, which is going to be the green, the burnt umber, and the ultramarine blue, just like I did on the other one. One's a little bit more of a blue-green, the other one is a little bit more of a yellow-green. So let's take the umber, the blue, and the green, and now you can see it begin to sing. Notice again, even though we don't want a lot of dark out here, I'm going to put just enough to where the edges are defined and it accomplishes what we would like it to accomplish. So even though this green is pretty much like what's behind it, it still works out fairly well this way, the way we want it. Okay, that's going to conclude the topiary part of this, at least for that part of it. Now let's just go ahead and, without wasting any time, take some of our raw sienna, our Naples yellow, and our burnt sienna, and let's begin to put in the stems. Now if this works fairly well, I won't be able to do that because of the other colors that I put in. So I'm gonna put this in here. I'm talking to myself right now, but what I did, areas like this, well, you can't see where my left hand is, but I covered up the stems, and I'm going to have to come back and redo them, so we'll just go ahead and cover this up completely, and I'll come back and highlight it with the white. Okay. Now, we're going to put it in basically with a little sienna and Naples. Now for our little bit darker shadow area, we're going to come back in. We're going to highlight them slightly with just a little bit of burnt umber, while it's still wet, preferably. Couldn't have been any better. For the final stage now, first of all, start by showing a very distinct shadow under here and against the umber and Naples. It's still relatively wet. going to add our dark and just let it kind of run into the pattern that's already been established. Okay, that's pretty much what we're going to repeat on the rest of it, but let's just go ahead and do it since we're on a roll right now. Again, I like to take the, I think I'll pause for the next two because they're going to be similar, then I'll come back and put the highlight. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of tape, and I don't want to bore you with a lot of repetition. A lot of this you can figure out. Believe me, this can get a little boring watching it continually, so let's just stop it right there. Now I'm going to show you all the completed topiaries in just a minute, but in concluding this, I'm going to flip the paper around like this, and I'm just going to try something here because it's just something inside of me says that I'd like to see a little bit of a highlight on the side of the topiaries rather than having them blending or perhaps having them a little bit too dark. So let's see what happens by adding just a little bit of Naples yellow with the white. Now, Naples itself is a very opaque color, so it almost covers completely on its own, but we'll put a little white with it. Now I like that because what's happening, it's slightly lighter now than what's in front of it, and it's giving me enough to just break it up in an interesting and pleasing manner. So since I like that well enough, this is all still pretty wet in here. Let's try it anyhow, and it may look real good because of that fact, and let it just run back like the darker areas did. Let's see if I can get this in the screen for you here. I think that'll be satisfactory. Now see, it just gives us just a little bit of an edge and breaks up areas that I feel need to be broken up. Okay, let's flip it around now, and we may come back and tone some of that down. However, I feel that when the white dries in some of those areas much more transparently than it is right now, I think it's going to be pretty close. Now we'll do that. Now you see the reason for the stages, the light, middle tone, and dark in the simple abstract design, and it's standing out very nicely. Let's put our mat on it, and I think we're very close to what we want it to be. Now before I go in for the final stage, I'm going to go back in with my sienna and my blue. Just give me somewhat of a grayish tone here. And I'm going to put just enough of a distinction against those facial boards to where it accomplishes a separation that I feel I need to have around that window. And this is very simple to do. I can either just blend it out like this. Now I'm probably going to come back and put a little bit darker shadow under it, but I felt like it needed that. I'll leave that little bit of texture in it. Let's come over here and do the same thing. Now this is when you get your painting to a certain point, you can begin to think of it compositionally. Up to this point you've been preoccupied with details, but now we're looking at composition. I can always end this somewhere very nicely. Okay, because of the leaves throughout the entire pattern. Now come in with a little bit more of my darker blue right up under here. I may even want to make this slightly darker later because, you know, it's a facial board, it's standing out. There is a little bit of a shadow under it. Now, that's going to dry quite a bit lighter naturally, and I think it's going to be a little bit more conducive to what I'd like it to be in here. Let's just not have that end too abruptly over here. Okay, now that's working well enough. Of course, it's going to dry somewhat different over here. I may not want it quite as strong as I would on the base area there, but I would like to be able to distinguish that this is a wall behind this facial board, and however slight it might be, it'll accomplish what I would want it to accomplish. You see, even that little bit right there gives you the slightest amount of definition that I think is needed. And under here, we get a slightly stronger color, indicating that that's up underneath the facial board. Could give us a reason to have a little bit more shadow. Maybe just a little bit more here. Now we'll carry this all the way out to the edge. Again, a lot of people would be afraid to do this, but I find it just creates a lot more interest. They see it's just enough to barely indicate that it's a definition I didn't have to worry about on the preliminary because of the size of it. And there's just that little bit up here. Kind of holds the composition in a little bit better too. Okay, all we have left to do now is the final details on the pots and the leaves, and that's going to be it. Alright, we're going to go ahead and conclude our first pot here. And again, you're going to find I'm going to be doing this very loosely, which is preferable in all of this, because I think this is where the interest and the excitement comes in. Now the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is this is going to be somewhat in the shadow. I'll come in like this and lay in a quick wash that will encompass the majority of my middle tone values. Now I realize that I'm going to have a dark shadow on this side of my topiary here, so I can leave this relatively light on here, or as I get around getting closer to the vase next to it, I can take this and possibly tint it a little bit and have a little bit of the sienna look, but make allowances for the shadows that are going to be against it. Now I might want to come in and make that just a tiny bit darker. Okay, now one of the nice factors about this particular paper, it's a negative as well as a positive, and that is it begins to dry very quickly. So as a result of it, leave a little reflected light out there. I'll be able to come back in and put some more of my stronger middle tone tones in, actually, just simply by using less pigment. Now notice I'm leaving that little reflected light. I may come back and decide that it needs to be darker. We'll wait on that. But again, it's in various stages of drying right now, which is what I like. Because again, I've got a good strong burnt sienna to pick up the pot. Don't want to lose that brilliant, brilliant cast light being cast across the front of it. Now for our final stage, we're just going straight for the ultramarine blue and burnt umber, maybe a little bit of sienna in it. First thing I'll do is I'll put my definition under here. And even though you may not think you would physically see it, you're going to have some fairly strong darks around the back side of this thing to create interest and so forth. So we'll just and create form. Notice I'm leaving it a little bit textured purposely. I'll come to my edges over here, and I'll just leave that plain burnt sienna. I want it to be a little stronger over here, so I'll just leave plain burnt sienna for my reflected light. Now, of course, even though I'm going to be loosening up on this, I still want it to have a degree of texture. Again, I don't need this to be too dark because I'm going to have the dark leaves up against it. And then one of the nice things about these old pots is you will get these little wider areas that either through paint or just chips or whatever, so I found it to be quite interesting, and we'll just incorporate a little bit of this into it. Even while it's wet, I like it better that way. Creates a little bit more texture. Okay, now we have at the base of the topiaries, we do have a relatively dark area where the soil and so forth is going to be. So we're going to just take a little bit of just the plain burnt umber. Maybe put a little burnt sienna in it. And actually, I guess we'd really want that to come along the base of the topiary so it doesn't look like it's growing out of the sod of it. And then we'll likewise come in with our concluding ultramarine blue and burnt umber areas and just settle it down, perhaps create a little bit of texture in it. Notice the lighter area at the top, I'm just going to leave it that way. Like a little shadow area behind there. I think that settles it down very nicely. And that'll conclude that portion of it. Now let me clean some brushes and then we'll do the Now I just quickly put in our other clay pot. Let's go to our topiary now, or excuse me, our vase. This really will be the last thing before I do a little section on the foliage for you, and it's going to pretty well conclude it. Now, we already have a somewhat of a Naples effect on there. However, I'm debating about whether to leave a little bit of a light on here. I think I will. Okay, so let's start with maybe the Naples. We're going to get kind of a grayish tone. We'll get the Naples and the blue and the sienna together. Just remember, we want this to be pretty well like it's in shadow. We don't want to be afraid of that part of it, but we're going to keep it light and airy as it comes around the edge over here. So let's just do it accordingly. Now that's looking pretty good. It's close to what I would like it to be. Let's go with a little bit more of the blue and the sienna now, and not be afraid to come in and indicate some stronger dark areas that I think are necessary to give this some form. They look a little strong right now. We might blend them out a little bit. Nonetheless, I feel very necessary. Even though it is a lighter vase, you have to have a certain degree of tone and texture in it to make it accomplish what you would like it to accomplish. Now, in the case of this one against the pot, I think I'd like this a little bit darker, with my reflected light maybe showing up down at the base of it. You know, this doesn't have to stand out extremely well. Might work a little bit of the sienna into it just to give it a little bit more color. Not have it quite so plain. Now I'll come back to that in a little bit, but since that works so well, let's just come at the top and we'll do the same thing. And you notice I'm not really fretting over any of this, but I do want to keep the lighter edges over here. So we'll just come down like this and pick in a few little bit more of those, a few little more of the colors there. All right, we'll sloop this down like it does. And again, get our mixture. bring it on out like this. Likewise, maybe come up around the top. Do the same thing. Okay, now we'll probably hit some of that with our grayer color, but now take a little bit of the blue and the sienna that we've been using. First of all, we're going to put that in there rather strongly. And then we're going to blend the mixture down, trying to adequately cover all the areas necessary to make it give it the 3 dimension that we want it to have. Now this one wound up being a little bit more extensive than I thought it would be, but I found it very intriguing, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed sharing it with you. You think you want to shorten things, sometimes it's just really hard to know how much and when and so forth. Okay, now a final thing up here, let's make that stand out a little bit more definitely. Okay, and likewise we're going to do a little bit of that in here. Just a little bit more sienna color. And I don't even object to the slightly more textured effect maybe than I had in my original on this one. I think it kind of enhances it a little bit, quite frankly. So we'll bring that all down like you see it here. I think this is going to have to be a little bit darker. Okay, and then on our final area down here, we'll likewise continue on making this slightly darker. Perhaps should have put in the lighter tone we're using first, which will be fine. Now I'll let that dry for a second. And while it's drying, I'm not going to be shy about coming back in here and beginning to define some of this a little bit better. There looked to be some type of a pattern or something on the actual vase itself, and then maybe around the base could have a little more definition like that. Okay, and then perhaps right under it we could accent that a little bit. Maybe a little pattern down here also. Now we're getting pretty close to the conclusion of it. We might want to show just a tiny bit more dark in here, even though we know this is in an illuminated area. It's pretty light. Okay, now I think that's going to pretty well concluded on the vase, because I really don't want to put a lot more detail. I'm going to break in just a moment and come back and put the foliage in. Now I don't know exactly how much more we've got on this tape, so I thought I would come in, and I've just been putting some outlining around this edge, around the side of this and so forth, and I thought I might just come in and show you how we just, I know a lot of you probably wonder how you put in that detail. Well, I don't. I just notice I'm just dragging that brush. I'm going to give a little bit more of an accent, like it's right up underneath there. This is not going to be real dark, but it'll accomplish what we want. Okay, now that's really going to pretty well take care of that detail. Let's take a little bit of the naples now. I'm going to show you a little something I learned about naples that I like very much. I might want to have a little bit of a shadow on the side of these. Now this is a bright area in the photograph I'm using. It's almost solid white. So I can take that Naples and it covers so well that I can just keep the white, touch up a couple of sideline areas, maybe put it at the base. You see? And look at how that just tones down. Well, you may not see it as well as I can, but it's a little bit artificial looking, and that just gives it just enough to not just be a white area pasted on there. And that's just pure Naples. I'll bring it up down here and do the same thing. See, it's covering up some of my pencil line, as well as not leaving everything solid white, and that way the whites will tend to stand out a little bit more. Of course, the clincher on all of it is going to be putting in the foliage, which is what we're going to do right now. And I'm going to pause for a second. I'm just going to put in a little bit of the foliage because it'll be the same technique all over. And actually in that area you'd even want to begin to take a little bit of liberty. Okay, again, I know we're running out of tape, but I want to take a little bit of time to show you the last portion. Of course, if it runs out, we'll just get another tape, but it's much easier from this end to not have to do that. We're going to take a little burnt umber and Hooker's green. Now, this is where most people, including myself some time ago, would have had a tendency to really try to make things too detailed, okay? We want to show the foliage area. My beginning, I even put a little bit of cadmium in there. Not much. Okay, now we want to begin our basic foliage area. We're going to cover up all the lines. I'm going to do one section for you. Okay, now notice how I'm going to get a little bit more of the green rather than the brown, make it a little prettier. Of course, this is going to dry lighter and it's going to dry a little bit different. Now, I'm not just being reckless, but I really am purposely trying to be loose. Because the essence of what I'm attempting to do here is to just give the free-flowing effect of that vine as it ambles around the inside of that window there in all directions so interestingly, as all of us have seen at one time or another at our grandmother's or our parents' or someone's home that we envy so much. Notice how I'll put the area in, put the area below it in. You see, and this is going to be typical. This is how we want to do it, and you don't want to do a lot more than that. Now watch, I'll come in inside of that area now, and I'm going to take the Hooker's green, the burnt umber, and the ultramarine blue, and inside of this now, to break it up and to create the interest that I'd like it to have while it's still wet, I'm going to come in and do a little bit more of that. Now, you might think, well, I wish you'd show us everything else. It's not necessary. That's all we're going to do. Loosen up a little bit. Don't watch every detail. Let's put it on pause for a second. Now, I thought I'd break in the tape a little bit. You can see much of this is very opaque. You kind of have to look at your painting. But I wanted to at least break in enough for you to see how the pattern's beginning to develop. Now, see later, if I like doing this wetly. Putting certain emphasis here and there, letting it fade, not so strong in some places. But you need these strong darks to really tie it together. Now, as you can see, it's really developing very nicely, and I'm going to go ahead and continue to pause again. Now, I thought I'd put this back on record again for you so you can see how, just like in the smaller one, I'm loosening up. I'm just filling this area in very quickly. I know where everything else is sketched in over here. I'm getting ready to put it in, but I've got a little bit more to put over here. I'm just going to move it on around, and then you'll see the finished part in a second. I thought I would tune it back in now while I'm concluding this portion of it. Now, I always start off with my colors a little bit lighter. Now notice I'm going to come on the inside with the darker tones. Watch you don't make, the biggest problem you're going to have to worry about is making all of these the same size. So vary them. Watch repetition without variation. I probably came up a little higher on one of those than I really intended to do, but that's all right. And there's all kind of ways I could break it up if it was important, but I don't feel like it is. So again, we're going to come in with a little bit of a darker pattern now. And I'm actually just connecting this like it's part of this one up here rather than wanting to give the inclination it was coming around the bottom. Alright, let's take our number 4 brush now and let's get some burnt umber and burnt sienna fairly darkly, and probably put a little ultramarine blue in there with it. Let's begin to put in our vine. Now you may barely be able to see this, so I'll take a moment here and bring this camera in just a little bit closer. Again, this will just be a pattern of what we're going to do on the rest of it. But so many of the leaves come off of the vine in a pattern that, and then we'll just have a separate vine out here, you see? And this one I want it to look like this is coming out. And then every now and then, just have a little inclination like this of where your leaves are coming from. Even though you may not see the vine itself, it's just another tool that you're going to personally have to give it more definition. And interest, I might add. Okay, so we're just going to bring that vine down. It's going to connect everything very nicely. Okay, now this is getting very close to all I think that I'm going to need over here. And again, I'm consciously trying to not overdo it, not overwork it. Okay, let's put a little bit of the information coming out from here. Just something to give it a little bit more of a pattern. Okay, I think this is going to be sufficient for this. A little bit of foliage I've got left to do over here. I'm going to go ahead and conclude it, and then we'll line this thing up. We'll just let you pick up a little bit more of this area here. Moving around, just to give you an idea of what it's looking like. I'm moving right around the corner of it here, and of course I feel like each area that I complete now just absolutely adds to the excitement of it and the completed effect that it's going to have. Now remember, it's that burnt umber and the green that we're using for our primary base color. Just go right up against the stem there a little bit. Some of this, as I get closer to the darker topiary areas, I'll purposely back off a little bit on the pigment. Now, since I had so much of this side of the picture going out of the painting, I'm purposely giving it a little relief on the other side so it's not quite so symmetrical. And I'm probably going to have these in, because of the darker sections that we've got over here, I'll probably have these in a little bit lighter. And you have a real problem here if you don't watch it with repetition. So I'm trying to avoid that if at all possible. Now, let's come in with a few more of the darks, not as much maybe as we've been having, but enough to where it definitely does what it's supposed to do. I'm going to do a few more things in here, put it on hold, and then come back and put the final details on the bottom. Now, in concluding the vine, I've already started this section. I would like to just show you actually how in this section here, where the sunlight is coming in directly and catching the, actually illuminating the vines as well as the rest of the area, even though I may come back in and darken this considerably I'm going to still start with more of a cadmium yellow, hooker's green, and burnt umber. You can see how I did this all up in here. And then I'll come back in and adjust accordingly. Now as I come over to the darker section, I'll lose it, you see. Now, with that effect, I'll take more of the umber and green now and come back inside of this. This isn't going to give me a strong dark, but this is going to just enhance what I've already put down there. I'll just do one little section here. And then I'll probably come, because again, I'm trying to not have it quite as dark. And I'll connect these with some vines in a moment that should work very effectively. And then probably won't go in with a lot of strong dark in some of these areas. Maybe just touch it up a little bit around the base. So it's still a little bit wet. Let it do what I want it to do, and then move on. As I come in now, and I start putting in some of the final vine areas, I want you to notice how I'm doing this brush. I'm not just coming in with a straight, boring line. I'm dragging it, pulling it, continually trying to vary it. And that is so important in achieving the term you hear very much at my academy, repetition with variation, because that is our biggest problem. In most cases, we tend to just want to make things too perfectly. Well, let's just connect this with this. And then this will come, maybe just have a little bit of it coming out here. See, this is just my decision to break some of this up. Okay, I'll go ahead and put the final stuff in, and that's going to be it. We'll now let you look at the concluded painting. Come back to it. As I mentioned, a lot of this has been repetitious. I might just mention that whereas I went in with the umber and the green on most of your preliminary foliage in here, then the ultramarine blue and burnt umber. In the lighter area coming in through the window, I went in with the green and the, I may put a little bit more dark in here, but I came in with the green and the cadmium yellow, a little burnt umber to put this part in, and kind of washed it a little bit lighter out here. Didn't put quite as much detail as I did in this area over here. Now some of this may be a little bit heavy, but I think I needed to carry the weight of this over here. I did put in the rest of the vines. Noticed a little bit more cadmium yellow effect up here than I have down here. All the shadows now are working exactly like I want them to work, and I think for all practical purposes we're going to go ahead and call this one concluded and call it completed. And I trust if you decide to paint it, it will be something that will be a lot of fun for you, as it has been for me. I think you'll learn a lot from it.